This webinar is Getting the Full Story on Product Safety, brought to you by Ignite Solutions, CMM Magazine, and ISSA. And as you can see, we have two panelists, Dr. Charles Gerba, Professor of Environmental Microbiology, University of Arizona, and Mark Warner, National Sales Manager with the Bolin Company. So what a great topic we have today. Everyone needs to know about this. So getting the full story on product safety, separating myths from facts. It must be April 23rd at 1 o'clock. We're going to look at information as you see on your slide on this screen here. You know, what is important? What makes a study worthy of attention? And what should we understand about cleaning product labels, safety data sheets? Do we even know what they mean, what they say, how to apply it? During the presentation, we're going to have some common myths and misconceptions. I'm not going to read this to you. You can see what they are, but a couple might stand out. Number 3, I think, is important to most of us. Can germs become resistant or tolerant to disinfectants? In other words, every time we do our cleaning, are we just adding to the challenge, or are we actually solving something? I like myth number 5 as well. Is cleaning good enough? Cleaning really well. Safety data sheets, again, we'll talk also about research studies and toxicity studies. Studies can be important, and they'll be dissected and explained by our 2 expert panelists. So I'm going to pop back in at the end of this discussion with some questions, but I'm going to turn it over now to Mark Warner to start this off. Mark Warner his previous job was Hair Club for Men, but he got fired. So Mark is now here with us as a panelist on this presentation. So Mark, you said I could say it, Mark. You did. Yeah. It's all yours. Take it away.
I did say you could say it. I knew that I was in danger when I said that, although some people are jealous, actually, of my
in the chat. Everyone who's jealous, say something.
Come on. Nobody. That's not fair. I see one thumbs up. Yes.
Okay. You win.
Anyway, so, my name's Mark Warner. I'm really involved with this as a person that's engaged with the cleaning industry. So it is the cleaning industry's perspective of what are all these myths and how do we deal with it? I'm a huge believer that the front line of defense has now been taken on by the cleaning industry. And with all the things that are happening in the world, all too often, we don't necessarily get recognized for the efforts that we're doing within the cleaning industry to do what we can to stave off things like infectious diseases that can not only make people sick, but can cause death and destruction. So we've all lived through that in the last 3 years with COVID. And it's kind of amazing that prior to that, oftentimes what we do in the cleaning industry fell below the radar screen. During the last couple of years, it's been elevated to center stage. And I'm here to thank all of the people within my industry, the cleaning industry, for all the efforts that have been done over the last several years and moving forward because of the infectious diseases that keep attacking us. I've been engaged with the ISSA as a member of the board of directors, as well as manager of the education department. I worked with a gentleman by the name of Branton Serro, who is the global director of education training and certification. Also have worked a lot of years with the IICRC in different capacities and other nonprofit associations dedicated to the cleaning industry. But this is not about me. I'm the guy here that is just so thrilled and so grateful and so honored to be able to co-present with a gentleman that I have watched for years. And so it is my great honor to introduce everybody to Dr. Charles Gerba. Dr. Gerba, thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to work with you on this broadcast.
Well, thank you, Mark, because I'm glad about your introduction, because I think the importance of good cleaning and hygiene are really underestimated. People don't realize that hygiene, cleaning had more impact on disease reduction in the world than all the vaccines and antibiotics put together. And I'm kind of honored always to give these talks, because we do work on trying to quantify the benefits of cleaning and disinfecting. Because really, to me, it's always the unsung heroes. You're never going to get a medal for all the diseases you prevented, for all the people who didn't die from what you did. But we're trying to put numbers behind that all the time and to demonstrate the proper use of products and the application. So it's really an honor to do this because it's something I feel really strongly about because I realize the importance and significance on human health.
So I also wanted to say something on behalf of both of us, Dr. Gerba, and that is how grateful we are to the ISSA for hosting a program like this of a topic that you and I are passionately interested in. So thanks to the ISSA for that, and to Jeff Cross for helping it happen. I loved how you talked about and reinforced the cleaning industry's efforts and what has been the outcome. The whole cleaning industry has changed. They used to be making things look and smell nice and taking out the trash. Now the cleaning industry is all about cleaning for health, making sure that we're creating environments for the occupants and visitors to buildings to make sure they're not getting sick or worse. With all that effort to go into cleaning for health, it's changed the dynamics of the cleaning industry. So now we look at things like, are people documented as certified and trained in the arts and sciences of cleaning and disinfection? Or were they selling used cars yesterday and just exhaled on a mirror and fogged it and got hired to be a cleaner? The reality of it is the change in the world has really shifted the emphasis on being able to document that you understand how to do things and what to use in their events. So that has changed. And Dr. Gerba, the headlines have changed all over the world. When I was growing up as a kid, believe it or not, like I'd look for headlines about a new Schwinn bicycle with high-rise handlebars being introduced. And my kids have grown up with completely different headlines. Headlines like this, MERS outbreaks and flesh-eating bacteria and COVID. COVID really is kind of what's been at the top of everybody's minds. But Dr. Gerba, have all these other things gone away in the meantime?
No, none of them have gone away. I think they're not in the headlines anymore, but we still have a lot of illness and deaths associated with these and there's always new ones evolving all the time. Microorganisms aren't like a chemical contaminant. They have sex, and so they keep evolving, and they use that. So there's always one on the horizon that we're always looking at. So I think the SARS outbreak was a wake-up call that we really need to pay more attention, be better prepared in the future for the evolving microorganisms that are going to be a health risk to humans.
I have to say this, that some things you hear, you can't unhear, and they create images in your mind. So your comment about germs having sex is something I'm not going to be able to shift away from. So, but anyway, with all that said, one of the things that we're watching is how these things tend to move around the world. And you can read about things happening in lower Jabip or upper wherever, and they could be on your doorstep in a day. Anybody that's been involved with the military knows you can get to anywhere on planet Earth in 24 hours or less. And microorganisms that cause disease know that as well. They travel as hitchhikers on people's clothing, their shoes, their luggage, and everything else. So they get around the world. And as these new things that Dr. Gerba referred to start emerging, we have to be conscious of where they're popping up and knowing they could be on our doorstep. Here's a list, Dr. Gerba, of some of the things that are emerging out there. And I know you threw a couple others at me the other day while we were talking.
Yeah, the list grows all the time that we're dealing with. I look at my career, and sometimes it's been one pandemic after another, and it's always another organism there that we have to deal with. I think, and you're going to find another one, a new one on that list, guaranteed in the next couple of years too.
I'll have to update this. Maybe they'll invite us back, Dr. Gerba, and we'll do an update in a year. What do you think?
Oh, yeah, it always pays an update. Our understanding and how they're transmitted is always needing an update with it. And I'm glad you showed this one here. We've been doing a lot of this similar work in public restrooms and that. How do they get contaminated? Where should we be focusing? Have we been overlooking certain areas where you can get exposed to microorganisms. Trouble is, every time you walk in a restroom like that, somebody calls the police on us. But anyway, we know a lot about public restrooms and how they get contaminated.
I know this slide was one that was talking about CRE and the fact that colonizes in biofilms that exist above the P-trap in a sink drain up to the drain grate. So the worry was the splash of the water running out of the faucet actually kicking up forms of bacteria. And this testing plates documented that that does in fact happen. And you shared with me that it's not just the sink you need to be worried about, right? In the bathroom?
Yes, it's a lot of different areas, sink, floor. All of these are sites where you can find organisms. A lot of people think they're not important, but things aren't steady in a restroom or in a building, office building where everybody is moving all the time. It creates airflow and movement of organisms all over the facility.
I think you made a comment to me the other day that you got to make sure you look where you park your toothbrush.
Yeah, we've done studies on aerosols, and I hope some people have seen the recent photos. They've done a time-lapse photographs of toilet flushes. But if you keep your toothbrush too close to the toilet, you're brushing your teeth what was in the toilet because it gets ejected quite a distance. So you have to realize that hygiene in the toilet controls a lot of the restroom hygiene too.
Well, I knew that we were talking about toilet flush plumes, and I thought that that was a great segue from the sink biofilms. But the big issue that we're really dealing with all the time in the cleaning industry is how clean is clean? Is it looks clean? Is it really safe? And the bottom line is there's been an awful lot of concern about having surfaces that look clean, but in reality, they carry some kind of film of pathogenic microorganisms, whether it's bacteria, viruses, or even spores. These are our invisible enemy. And I've had people say, well, I cleaned it up really good before I used it or sat on it or whatever. And the World Health Organization says even thorough cleaning can only remove about 90% of the germs that are on there. And for the record, 90% isn't even close to what sanitizing and disinfection is all about. The issue, of course, is that these surfaces, although they may look clean, they actually harbor reservoirs of pathogenic microorganisms, be it bacteria, viruses, or spores. It gets on our hands as we touch doorknobs and handrails. Our hands are then looking for some way to get it into our body, not on purpose, but it's on our fingers. And from there, we end up touching our face, just like Captain Picard here. People will touch their face over 20 times an hour without thinking about it. And it is how these microorganisms that get collected on your hands actually make it to your eyes, your nose, your mouth, or an open wound you might be scratching. So all of these things can occur. So we need to know, where are these reservoirs and what do we need to be conscious of? And anybody that watches Dr. Phil and Oprah Winfrey and some of the modern TV stuff, you know that touch points has been the focus. But touch points aren't the only reservoir. If all you're doing is disinfecting touch points, you are, I think the military term is, you are SOL, meaning that there are too many other areas where pathogens can exist. Things like above the floor horizontal surfaces, reception desks, desktops in general. These have the ability to collect things that precipitate out of the air and land on them. And then there's the floors. The floors are the super highways. They get on the wheels of carts, the wheels of cleaning equipment, the soles of shoes, and they traffic themselves all throughout a building, waiting for somebody to accidentally interact with the floor. However, we get questions about that all the time, Dr. Gerber. It's like, well, I don't rub my hands on the floor. And I have to say something like, well, time out, grasshopper. It's not about rubbing your hands on the floor. It's your hands coming in contact with something that was on the floor, a power cord, a dropped pen or pencil, a dropped reading glasses, bottom of a purse that gets picked up and put on a desktop or a laptop bag. All of these are fomite events that cause what's on the floors to make it to an area where our hands can touch it. And that's what we need to be concerned about. We need to be concerned about all three reservoirs, not just touch points. So with all of that, it kind of brings us full circle to, you can't just have a disinfectant that says it kills something and go marching in without knowledge about how to use it. And the other end of that is also true. You can be very knowledgeable about how to use a disinfectant, but if the disinfectant isn't appropriate for what you're going after, you will also fail. It's a marriage of having the right tools, equipment, and chemistry, along with the proper procedural knowledge on how to do it. Without both, it fails. So with all that said, it takes us into talking about different levels of efficacy on disinfectants. I get asked this all the time. What is the difference between things like a bathroom disinfectant that smells like baby powder and might be a mild non-acid type of bathroom cleaner? Would you use that on an OR room table or an exam table? And the answer to that is no. There's different levels of disinfectants. A bathroom cleaner is generally aimed at not only going after pathogenic microorganisms, but also putrefactive bacteria, in other words, odors. Where in a hospital environment, they're more interested in things that might cause hospital-acquired infections. Those are things that need to be listed on their label. Beyond that, sometimes we're looking for disinfectants to go after bloodborne pathogens and other very difficult to kill organisms because of their thick cell wall. And in those cases, we look for disinfectants that carry a tuberculocidal claim because of their aggressiveness in breaking the cell wall. You can see from this Rotala scale that the chart shows that some organisms at the very bottom of this list are pretty easy to kill. That includes, by the way, SARS-CoV-2, which is the virus that caused COVID. But up at the very top, you get into things like spores that might come from anthrax or C. diff. Most often, what we work with in the cleaning environment is things that will clean bathrooms, will clean hospitals as a disinfectant concentrate mixed for use, and then we might use a ready-to-use product to go after tuberculocidal environments like blood spills and so on. It takes us into looking at disinfectants on two levels also. If you don't pre-clean a surface and all you do is spray disinfectant down on a dirty surface, all you've done is created mud. The reality of it is you need to pre-clean a surface, then apply a disinfectant and give it some contact time. So one of the things you want to watch for is whether or not the disinfectants that you're working with have some degree of cleaning ability as well as killing efficacy. And so those are different things that we look at. Cleaning, again, goes after about 90% of the germs. Sanitizing, you don't achieve until you've gone beyond 99.9% of the germs. And disinfecting is called a 5-log reduction. That is going after 99.999% of most pathogens, or in some cases, a 6-log reduction, going after 99.9999% of the pathogens. In other words, reducing their count to the point where they can't colonize and become an infection threat. That's a big difference than just 90% from cleaning. And so that's part of what we want to talk about. And you really need to be reading the label to make sure that you are using a product that is efficacious for what you want to kill, and that you're following the manufacturer's instructions for use, including, did you pre-clean the surface and have you allowed the proper amount of contact time? If you're wondering about whether or not a disinfectant can kill everything you're worried about, get a hold of the efficacy data sheet. The efficacy data sheet will give you a list of the organisms it's been tested against. That efficacy data sheet gets submitted to the EPA for review before it can be published. So these are documented. Beyond all that, you've got safety data sheets, which can also give you an indication of what is in that disinfectant and what do I need to do to use it safely so I don't get injured or that I don't damage a surface. There's been a ton of studies on all this stuff. And Dr. Gerba, I know you're anxious to talk about some of the studies. One of the studies is a study you yourself did, and that was with the Applied Environmental Microbiology study from the American Society of Microbiology. Can you share a little of that study with us?
Yeah, I think what we really looked at was the efficacy and understanding for people of the importance of reading the label. Manufacturers have the ability to actually formulate certain products, particularly quaternary ammonium compounds, that are targeted for certain organisms. And this article, we do away with some of the misformulated so they are appropriate. That's why reading those labels is so important in turn to understand, does this product work against norovirus? Does this product work against SARS-CoV-2 and that? Checking with data on what the product is for, registered and tested against any claim. There is variability of whether or not the product will work or not. And that's why I think it's so important to understand that.
Some of the comments people ask is, some of these studies, who actually does all these studies when somebody says my disinfectant works? And it's kind of important that there's been studies on every single disinfectant that's ever made a kill claim in the United States. It's done by the EPA. Different types of active agents have been studied very, very thoroughly. And some of the things that they want to look at is, are these safe if they're used as directed? And some of this goes through extensive testing by independent labs prior to being submitted to the EPA for approval for its use. Other government bodies take a look at it as well. And I wanted to bring that up, Dr. Gerba, because years ago, many, many years ago, some of the disinfectants that we used to work with were things like pine oil disinfectants. We worked with phenolics. We worked with glutaraldehydes. We worked with iodines. Heck, we even worked with massively strong concentrations of bleach. All of these were extremely corrosive. And even in the case of things like strong solutions of bleach, it's been documented that can actually attack stainless steel on an OR table and cause corrosion. Some other of the active agents that were used many years ago were things like phenolics. Phenolics were so corrosive that they actually became banned from use in neonatal units in acute care hospitals due to something called Kawasaki syndrome, or the possibility of causing a premature death from an infant in the neonatal units. All of this is all we had years ago. And then along came a miracle. One of the miracles was having the ability to kill germs without using something that was so corrosive that attacked even metal surfaces. And what I'm referring to there is the evolution of quats. Quats came along about 20, 25 years ago or so, and they were marveled because they had the ability to kill bacteria and inactivate viruses without being corrosive on all the surfaces in a hospital or in a school or in an office building or a restroom or locker room, for that matter. Since then, it's been used in a variety of different products, not just commercially, but also used in many household products. Beyond that, and certainly since COVID occurred, there's been a lot of new active agents that have been introduced to the market. And some of those new active agents are fascinating for sure. But I do need to say that some of the studies that are out there regarding active agents, some of them have maybe a reason to question whether or not there is a motive behind the study. So, Dr. Gerba, let me ask you that. Is it possible at all that any kinds of studies out there might be oriented towards the aims and the goals of the researcher themselves, or are all studies done completely with full honesty and full transparency?
Well, I think you really have to look at some of the studies and some of the claims that are made in that. I think what we have the possibility of designer disinfectants today, and I think targeting them for certain uses, particularly in commercial applications, has a big benefit. I think what we've seen, because we evaluate a lot of products, is the evolution of products that are more broad spectrum, that target certain areas. What we've tried to demonstrate, are they really beneficial? Do they reduce the spread of, like, say, viruses in a building and that? And so what we do is we look at buildings with different interventions. I think today the tendency is to show what an intervention with a certain product does. How does it reduce exposure? How does it reduce the probability of getting infected? And that's what we're kind of after too. And with these innovation in products, it's becoming more exciting for us because we realize we now have a toolbox. We just don't have one thing for one purpose, like bleach was done because you could use it anywhere, very corrosive. It was probably overkill for most of the things that the products you mentioned that are really no longer on the market, rather than targeting where we use a product, how often we use it, and what organisms are really of concern on it. But I really see a lot of promise that we can do a better job with better products, with less effort, I feel, too, by targeting. But it really takes an understanding, both the facility managers and the people living in a facility too, the importance of really doing the right job targeting what we do.
You know, that brings up an interesting question that has popped up, Dr. Gerba, and that is, you know, is there an evolution not only occurring with disinfectants and how they work, but are the microorganisms themselves evolving to the point where they have become resistant to disinfectants or have some increased level of tolerance to disinfectants? And I want to ask you that question. As a scientist, you would be able to answer it in a much more effective way than me. I've been asked that in the past, and my answer to that has been, it's kind of like, can paper become resistant to burning from a flame? The answer is no, it's not. And so the disinfectants, the way they work, is not like an
Mark,
antibiotic. They actually break the cell wall and cause it to explode. But you told me that some of this is happening a little bit. Can you expand on that?
I think there's some confusion even among the microbiologists of the use of these terms. No longer use a product, and it gets confused with antibiotics. When you say it's resistant to an antibiotic, a certain microorganism, that means you can no longer use it. It will no longer kill it. And what we do see is a little bit of tolerance. Like, microorganisms are a little clever. They might be a little more tolerant to a disinfectant, but they're still killed it by the doses that are used in practice for disinfectant. So yeah, increased tolerance, but not resistance. And I think that's a confusion even among the microbiologists. Microorganisms don't become resistant to disinfectants. You're basically, I always try to tell people, using dynamite to kill a cockroach. You really don't see advantage of them using disinfectants, as it reduces your risk. Like antibiotics, you see resistance developing.
I appreciate that answer, and I will actually share that information with the people I talk with as I travel through the planet. You know, some of the things that I do get asked quite a bit is, you know, you can't see it. If you're cleaning up a muddy room and you get rid of the mud, you end up with a room that looks clean. But if you're disinfecting a room that starts off by looking clean, except that you're going after bacteria and viruses, how do you actually know you accomplished it? And so some of the things people ask about is, are there ways to test it? And we all learned about swab tests and PCR tests when we were swabbing our nose for COVID, or if we've been involved as an environmental services professional going after swab testing in a hospital environment. But there's some new equipment out there as well. ATP has been used a lot by professionals involved in the cleaning industry as a way of documenting that they have um, gone after a room and either sanitized or disinfect the surfaces in it. And they use these tools to show the reduction, which was solely a result of the efforts made to clean and disinfect that room. Some of the other things that we see out there is hyperspectral imaging, which is sciences that are on the horizon that have the ability to actually see through a camera's eye areas that might have get missed by a disinfectant. And some of that boils down to the human element and making sure that people are following the proper procedures and proper protocols, make sure they're crossing their T's and dotting their I's. This kind of camera equipment and the ability to isolate areas that have been missed on the picture taken by those cameras, that's pretty sophisticated technology nowadays. But they're saying that as that technology evolves, who knows? 5 or 10 years from now, it may be a 99-cent app on your iPhone, which would be an interesting way to document whether you are sitting on a clean toilet seat or entering a clean seat on an airliner. And then some of the other things that are coming down the pipeline is the use of AR equipment, the ability to kind of like they use in the military, where you wear scientific gear that allows you to detect areas that you may have missed and maybe the proper procedures to go after. So all of these things are things that are coming down the pipeline as a way of us trying to stay, let's not say staying ahead of Mother Nature. We're not going to do that, but not getting caught too far behind. With all this said, Dr. Gerba, I wanted to go after some of the myths that Jeff talked about in the beginning. And one of them was, do we only have to worry about touch points? And I think we've pretty solidly answered that we've got to include above the floor surfaces that our hands touch, as well as the floors. Did you have any other thoughts you wanted to share on reservoirs of pathogens?
In our studies, we actually go through and try to do a germ geography. It's where your hands are, like desks clean their desktop on a regular basis. Either in a coffee break room, more germs in there and E. coli than in the public restroom. Why? Because people don't clean the office work area and they're preparing food. It's really informal restaurant in some facilities. So it was kind of interesting. Desktops, any place where your hands are a lot, desktops, computers. But I think other areas that are overlooked too is like floors. You mentioned that. Well, we've found vacuuming a floor just creates a snowstorm of germs when you do that. We were quite amazed. Or walking on a carpet can create quite an aerosol of microorganisms. So they tend to be important too. Sometimes they're hard areas to deal with, but people particularly have ignored the floor. There have been studies done in a hospital where they put tracer bacteria on the floor in the patient rooms, and they found it all over the patient rooms, the doctor, and other rooms where the patients were. So there's still a lot of mobility, and that's why controlling what's in the air is really a lot based on what's on the surface. Things are continually being mobilized all the time in the air. So doing proper surface decontamination, disinfecting. There are still unlooked areas too that could be. It's interesting. You discover a lot about human behavior when you start looking for germs. Let me tell you, even what stall people use. People prefer to use the middle stall. It's the germiest stall. If you want to issue, the least germy is the first stall. But I think there's a lot of good innovation that's going to, in the future, is going to, with the studies people have been doing, will make selection of products a lot better in the future that are more substantial in their claims and can actually do something with it.
Dr. Gerba, I watched your TED Talk, and one of the things you talked in there, you were talking a little bit about people's households versus the commercial environment. And I was stunned by a statistic you gave that there was something that was germier in a kitchen than people's average bathroom in a home.
So it's quite interesting to learn a little bit about people's human behavior. What's even interesting, we did a recent study on public versus home restrooms, and generally office restrooms are less germy, the toilet seat, the sinks, the tap, than a home restroom. Why? Because a home restroom is only cleaned usually once a week. And if you do interviews where public restrooms are cleaned every day, so it's safer to go to. I mean, if you're working in an office building, save it till you get to the office because it's a lot safer than doing it at home from what we've seen. And because people just don't disinfect as regularly.
Sir, I have to say that you're kind of the guru of all things related to bathrooms. So I know that one of the things you had said to me a couple days ago had to do with that if you had to make a choice between licking a toilet seat in your house or the sponge you use on your dishes, you should be very selective about that choice.
Yeah, the kitchen smell in the average home is the hot spot for fecal bacteria because they grow in there. They get in there from your raw meat products, your hands when you handle it. But you can get millions of E. coli in the kitchen sponge. It's the germiest object in the house because it's wet, it's moist, you're soaking up food. The cleaning detergents are biodegradable. If a bacteria ever dies anywhere, heaven is a sponge where it wants to go. And unfortunately, if you don't maintain your sponges, you move germs all over the kitchen area. That's why we recommend, in at least home sponges, that you disinfect it about every 3 or 4 days, or put it in a washing machine or dish machine because they can spread germs because bacteria can grow on them, like wet mops, for example. You really have to be attuned to that a lot of times because cleaning tools can be the problem themselves.
I've seen studies done that actually proclaimed that people who are not skilled in the arts and sciences of cleaning and disinfection can be one of the number one causes of the spread of disease rather than the elimination of it. Because if they're not cleaning and disinfecting properly, they may actually just be spreading organisms from surface to surface, cross-contaminating areas. So that's something that we're trying to fight by increasing education, training, and documenting it through certification. One of the questions I get a lot, Dr. Gerba, is is thoroughly sanitizing better than merely disinfecting? Because I was reading on a label one day, Mark, and it said I only had to give it 30 seconds of contact time with the sanitizer, but the disinfectant said I needed to give it a minute. Does that mean that the sanitizer is stronger than the disinfectant?
Yeah, sanitizer means it's usually only a 99.9% reduction of pathogenic organisms, or disinfectant, as you mentioned, is like a 9-log reduction of viruses. And so sometimes sanitizing is appropriate. That's only needs to be, you don't need that large reduction because it's not an area that's heavily contaminated, like a public restroom, for example. So there is a difference between sanitizer and disinfectant. When you're doing with hard surfaces, cleaning facilities, you largely is focused on a disinfectant.
I know that when it comes up for me in the cleaning industry a lot, Dr. Gerba, the way I address it is we need to be doing both things, but we're not doing them on the same surfaces. For example, hard surfaces can be disinfected and porous or fabric surfaces cannot be. And so things like carpeted areas or fabric or your skin, which is porous, our best goal is to sanitize them versus disinfecting. Whereas with a hard surface, our best goal is to disinfect them. Is that a fair statement to say?
That's very fair. If you touch a hard surface, the right one, you'll get 50% or more of the organisms on your finger. But if you touch a cloth surface, you only get 1%. So you don't, or less, 0.1% even. So you sanitizing is much more appropriate for those surfaces in terms of your probability of getting the organism on your hand.
Some of the other myths that that Jeff Cross promised that you and I would answer were things like, I've had people say to me, well, uh, I don't have to read the label. I know that what it kills is listed on the safety data sheet. And the answer to that myth is that's not true. The safety data sheet is merely just giving full disclosure of the ingredients that are in the product, along with the safety gear and measures that need to be taken when in use, or if there's some form of spill. The document that we use if we're really looking for deep information regarding kill claims is a efficacy data sheet that gives us a listing of the organisms it kills and the time frame required to meet that. So that's one of the other myths that we really wanted to address. I know that you have a lot of strong opinions about all the research studies that are out there, and some of them are, not all of them seem unbiased as you read them. And you had said earlier how you have to read them thoroughly and you have to look at the references. I thought about that, and I was thinking the most famous case of research that was trying to meet someone else's agenda was the research done by the tobacco companies saying that smoking didn't hurt you. I thought that was a perfect example of the fact that there can be research, but not all of it is necessarily unbiased. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, no, I think you're right. To a lot of people, let me give you an example of natural products. Like I get a lot of questions. Well, can't you use vinegar or baking soda on that? I mean, there's a study that said vinegar kills microorganisms, but people don't realize that they've never been qualified as a disinfectant like vinegar, baking soda. Why? Because you have to have a rigid test by EPA to be called a disinfectant. You have to be able to dirt load, they cause it, like if it was contaminated with urine or feces or whatever. Vinegar can't do that on it, or other types of home remedies if you want. I always get hit by those, but if they really worked, they'd be made into disinfectants and they'd have an EPA label on it.
You know, sometimes people are asking about things like vinegar and orange juice and citric acids and things because they're thinking that it's a non-toxic, being a natural thing. And I think it's kind of a good time to talk about the fact that there is some very great scrutiny given to any product brought to market in the United States to be used to disinfect commercial buildings, the commercial built environment. Some of those studies very keenly key on the safety in use. And as long as the manufacturer's instructions for use are followed, then they're approved by the EPA for use because they're not found to be radically harmful for somebody to use in a proper manner. And I know that some of the studies that I've read, Dr. Gerba, talked about how lab rats were killed by being injected by certain active agents. And I question the validity of a study like that. I think being injected with anything that's got the ability to kill germs might be lethal to anything or anybody. Do you have any thoughts on that question?
Yeah, it's a matter of, that's why the safety data sheets are important. Selling disinfectants in the United States, getting them approved, I should say, by EPA requires toxicity testing. These things have to be tested for their toxicity. And of course, there's always some toxicity associated with them because otherwise they wouldn't kill microorganisms. But proper use is so important. That's why reading the safety data sheets is important. Proper use is important. But of course, there's going to be some issues with any kind of substance that might kill a microorganism, no matter what it is, because we want to use something that'll actually kill the bacteria. Fortunately, bacteria in the viruses are a lot more susceptible to disinfectants in terms of damaging their structure.
Well, I think we've had the opportunity to kind of address everything that you and I wanted to go over. I know Jeff Cross has been very, very diligent about monitoring the questions in the chat window and in the Q&As. And that's because it's very difficult for Dr. Gerba and I to do that while we're presenting. So, Jeff, were there any important questions that came up during the presentation that we could spend a couple minutes to address?
We can do that. Mark, why don't you stop sharing your screen so our heads are bigger on the monitor. So
I don't know if that's a good thing or not, Jeff.
I don't know, but if Dr. Gerber wants to turn his camera on, he can, but we want to hear from him for sure. So we have a couple of other questions.
Yes, sir.
Here's one. With cleaning of floors, is disinfecting suggested, or is it more important to make sure they're just being cleaned daily?
Well, cleaning only removes 90% of the disease-causing germs, which means that we still have large enough quantities to cause disease. And that means that it can be trafficked all throughout a building, soles of shoes, bottom of the wheels of carts. Well, one of the biggest things we worry about is whether or not the custodial closets themselves have ever been cleaned and disinfected, because sometimes they're the actual petri dish, the hub where things can actually occur and then get transported with all the cleaning equipment. So I think the answer to that properly, Jeff, is it really depends on what's happening from the environment standpoint. If you're not facing any large spread of a disease in your community, then making it look good is probably fine. But if there's some form of outbreak that occurs, a flu bug going around, pink eye, or something like SARS-CoV-2, then you really have to make sure you're doing your due diligence by doing everything in your power to help shut down the spread of that disease. So we call that kind of amping up your sanitary defense mechanism, depending on the degree of threat that exists. Does that help?
I agree. All right, another question from our audience. How does the type of cleaning towel, disposable wiper, or rental rag being used impact the effectiveness of cleaning chemicals?
Well, there's two sides of that equation. I mean, I can look at that from the standpoint of what we used to use, like scraps of t-shirts and torn up terry towels. And nowadays, I would never look to those as being effective cleaning mechanisms. Nowadays, we use things like microfiber cloths because they have the ability to go deeply down into cracks and crevices, even in the veins of your hand, into the texture of your skin. The other thing is that you need to also be conscious of what those cloths are made out of, so that we aren't entering into a situation where the cloth itself might be slightly inactivating the active agent that's being used. There's something called quat binding, which means that cotton can actually cause a reduction in quat activity over time. So one of the things we look at is what are we using? And very often we'll use things that are pop-ups. One of the good reasons why pop-ups and disposables are popular is because it totally minimizes the potential spread of surface-to-surface cross-contamination. And it also assures that the disinfectant in use is at its highest level of potentiality.
That's a good response, Mark, too. I had to talk my wife out of using my old underwear for cleaning cloths in the home.
Jeff, anything else we should address, or do you want to let people know
Yeah, I have an
how
underwear
they can reach
question, but
out
I'm
to
not
us?
gonna ask it.
Oh, we've studied underwear. What do you want to know?
That'll be part 2 of this webinar series, folks.
Okay.
Underwear, according to Dr. Gerba. Okay, let's do another question. We're gonna go over time a minute, but what are your thoughts on incorporating stabilized aqueous ozone for general cleaning and sanitization? Oh, a stumper.
So I actually have seen that work really, really well on textiles and carpeted surfaces, to be honest, just because it breaks down. Ozone breaks down into, it's O3, it breaks down into just oxygen. And so it's a residue-free kind of approach. So I can give that kind of a level of endorsement. There's been a number of equipment manufacturers that have incorporated ozone generators into their hard floor and carpet care cleaning equipment in an attempt to do that. I have to say, however, that in most cases, they aren't aimed at pathogenic microorganisms. The biggest gain generally is putrefactive bacteria, which is odor causing.
Well, folks, we're at the top of the hour. Want to thank everyone for being here. Mark or Dr. Gerba, any final words of
Well,
wisdom?
number one is I told you I was going to hit the mark.
I didn't believe it.
The
1
time
second.
frame. And you doubted me. You thought not only did you tell everybody I failed at selling hair care products, but you also challenged me to even hit the time frame that I needed to. So Jeff, I got you, man.
So a couple of things before we end the webinar. I did want to ask you about your favorite hair care product. So if you want to get into that, we can go over time even more.
It's called a baseball cap.
Very good. And yeah, I didn't believe it for a second, Mark, you'd get through this in an hour, but you and Dr. Gerber were professionals. Thank you for doing that. And let's do this again.
I think I would like that very much.
All right. Well, thanks everyone for being here today.
Thanks, everybody.